let's just rip into this because we've got a really interesting story today about this government of saving money. They won't use the word austerity, but they are being austere, wanting to cut back, save money, to spend less. We've had a suggestion come out today that perhaps this treaty principles bill, the bill that is supposed to be, according to David Seymour, like almost literally God's gift to bills, it's going to be the best thing that ever happened to this country, even if it fails. There is a suggestion, and an extremely conservative suggestion, that potentially this treaty principles bill is costing $4 million, which of course raises the question of this government of the government that's saying they're going to look after every single one of our things. Key, we're not an ATM. We're going to look after every single one of your dollars. That they're choosing to spend $4 million on something that we're being told is not going to go any further than a select committee. So Craig Renney from the CTU is going to join us. You can see and hear him. Hello, Craig.
Kia ora.
See, look, two is better than three. So whatever that means. Hey, Craig, there is a story on RNZ today that there is an extremely conservative estimate suggesting $4 million cost to progress the treaty principles bill. A conservative estimate suggests it will cost about $4 million to progress the controversial and doomed treaty principle bill to a second reading at Parliament. You're the person who's done these numbers. Can you please explain to us why it's going to cost so much, where the numbers are from, and then we'll actually play a bit of a response from Mr. Seymour, who responded to RNZ about this conversation.
Sure, thanks. So there's a really sort of straightforward thing for this. In order to create a bill, you need a bunch of government departments usually, and a bunch of workers inside those departments to work out what it is the government wants to do, how it wants to do it, what's the legislation you're going to write, are there any fish hooks, are there any sort of loopholes, is there anything to work through? And in order to do that, that takes a bit of time. So what we've done is we've gone week by week through the bill production stages, and that's 31 weeks of work. We've then taken the work of each of the government departments who would be involved, and that's everyone from TPK, Te Puni Kokiri, through to DPMC, Te Arawhiti, Treasury, Ministerial Services, and we've individually costed everyone's time. To get the bill to the stage where it would be presented in the House, that's about $2 million of work. That allows for 5 weeks of drafting time with Parliamentary Council Office. And then it allows for a small amount of time for ministerial consultation, because by convention, you give 2 weeks ministerial consultation for any bill that you're bringing to Cabinet. And then you give 1 week's consultation for Cabinet Committee consultation. All told, that brings you to a bill of $2 million. Then you want first reading in the House. First reading in the House will take you 1 hour, plus tabling time, plus translation, other figures. That plus second reading, which you will get if you take something to select committee, costs you $435,000. Then you have a select committee process. Select committee has 4 members of staff, who are the committee clerk, the deputy clerk, the administrator for the committee, and the independent advisor. You take their wages, and you take the costs of traveling around the country and talking to people about this, and that brings you to a bill of $850,000. Altogether, that brings you to a bill of $4.15 million for the cost of developing a bill, taking it through first reading, taking it through select committee, taking it through second reading, and then for it to be binned, because everybody involved except for ACT has said it's going to be binned already. It is a pointless vanity exercise on behalf of a minister who is wasting money because they're desperate to have something to show that they've delivered.
Probably a good time just to play the audio from Mr. Seymour. We've got it's about 2 minutes of video. He was talking to, audio. It's ironic because it's just audio, just like me tonight. There's no video involved with Mr. Seymour. He's following my lead. Talking to one of the producers, not the hosts of Morning Report. And the point that was made, that seems really interesting because there's two things that are happening. One is that he is saying it's not really costing anything because these are government workers and they get that money anyway. But then the producer very cleverly says, but hang on. So the government, or we the people, are spending money on those salaries, and you're okay with it being spent on a job which is going nowhere. It could be getting spent on something worthwhile that's going to progress. So that's sort of the conversation, not to, spoil it too much. Have a listen.
These are fabricated figures from a trade union based on what people working for the government get paid.
Not just any trade union, Craig? Not just any trade union.
If there was no treaty principles bill, those people would still be working at the government and getting paid the same amount of money. So actually the cost is zero, or alternatively, you could say the cost is another bill that they would have otherwise been working on. I happen to think that the Treaty Principles Bill is a very worthwhile bill compared with other bills they'd be working on if they weren't doing this.
I suppose that would be the argument that a lot of people would make, is that it is time spent and money spent in this case that could be on a bill that might have a chance of success.
Exactly.
And the indication from your coalition partner.
So are you okay, Mr. Seymour, in spending this money on something that's never going to happen? It's a waste of money because it's not going through. You're still okay with that? You're still okay? Mr. Austerity, Mr. Saving Money, Mr. We can't waste any money, Mr. We have to get all this money out of the government departments because of the overspend that those lunatics who were in last time did.
Is that this bill doesn't have a chance of success. Do you agree with that?
No, I think first of all we need to be clear. It's not money spent; it's time by people who are already working for the government and paid by the government. You could argue that another bill would be more successful. But
sorry to stop it again. Time by people getting paid by the government, but it's not money. What are they getting paid for their time? Are they getting paid like butternut pumpkins? What are they? Because it's not money; it's time. But what a worker does, Mr. Seymour might be with us. What a worker does is they give their time to something, and in return they get money. That's how small business works, Mr. Seymour. Just in case he wasn't aware.
I actually don't think you could have a bigger success than democratising conversation about our founding document when so many people feel blocked out and often shouted down and accused of all terrible kinds of things for having an opinion on their country's future. If that's all it achieves, it'll be one of the most valuable pieces of legislation that these public servants could be working on. And to say that there's suddenly an itemised cost for every policy's preparation is not a standard that I would apply. But here's a standard that could be applied if the trade unions are worried about the cost of preparing bills.
Are you prepared, Craig, for some advice from Mr. Seymour? I'm just saying, you're prepared?
Delighted.
Okay, here we go.
Well, how about the fair pay agreements, which were always going to be shot down, have been removed? Are they complaining how much it cost to run through fair pay agreements, because that was a hell of a lot more money than anything on the Treaty Principles Bill, and that bill is no longer law. They don't apply that standard to causes they believe in, and I don't think that it's honest of them to apply that standard.
So in that case, and setting that standard, do you think it was a waste of time for them to be pursuing that?
I think that the Council, the trade unions, are finding that they don't have much to do.
Seymour doesn't realise yet he's walked into a trap. He doesn't realise yet. And he goes past it, and then he actually wants to come back and say, why did you ask me that? And the point gets made, because if you're saying that's a waste of money, then so is this. So it's a very good job done by this producer.
Because their ideas are out of favour.
But was it a waste of time for them to pursue that?
Well, I think it absolutely was a waste of time, because they should be.
So if you're comparing it to that, why isn't this a waste of time?
Well, I think you're wasting your time trying to learn logic, mate.
Yeah.
You talk about
we'll just leave it there, because he does come out. He then has to go, well, why did you? Let's visit that again. Why did you ask me that? He tries to justify it, but basically he's saying this is not a waste of money, even though it's not going to go through. But this other policy that the CTU or the trade unions want to support was a waste of money because it wasn't going to go through. Craig, love to hear your response.
I mean, it's a wonderful piece of sort of political sophistry. But I mean, the reality is that this is a government that is killing its own bill. When the Fair Pay Agreements Bill was written, the government supported it through all readings in the House. It was supported to being signed off by the Governor General, and it was enacted as a piece of legislation. It took another piece of legislation to remove it. We have a piece of legislation in front of us which the government does not support, which has been written by the government. It is an act of peculiar self-harm. There are very rare.
Sorry to interrupt. It almost sounds like we should contact someone, because that form of self-harm, you actually start to get concerned about, about their mental health, because, when a teenager and stuff self-harms, it's a really serious situation, and you get, mental health people involved. So that sounds like that kind of level of self-harm, Craig.
Well, it's almost a case of sort of schizophrenia in terms of, because David's talking about, or Mr. Seymour rather, is talking about, this is a bill which the government is working on, which government workers are working on, but which at the same time the government, the parties of government, are telling us will not pass.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when the Fair Pay Agreements Bill was written, it was designed to support the lives of thousands, if not millions, of low-paid workers across the country. This is a bill designed to appease one person in the House who doesn't have the support of every other party in the House in delivering that bill. And he's wasting $4 million of taxpayers' money at a very minimum in the process.
Yeah, let's just focus on that a little for a second, because he's saying it's not a waste of money, and he's basically saying it's disingenuous to throw these numbers around. So if he was looking at you right now saying, well, that's nonsense because they'll be getting paid it anyway, what's the response?
I mean, the response there is, it's difficult when faced with the truth that something's going to cost a lot of money to explain that you've made a terrible blunder, and that you should walk backwards on it. But the reality is we've spent about $2 million of this already. We don't need to spend the other $2 million right now. We could stop this. We could stop it at first reading. Submitters wouldn't be forced to go through the rigmarole of having to write submissions. It would signal to everyone actually how little Parliament thought of this treaty principles bill. Mr. Luxon could do a great job as Prime Minister and show some leadership and say, actually, do you know what? Don't do anything with this. All the government departments can stop work tomorrow and we'll kill this at first reading. We don't need to have a select committee. We don't need to have highly divisive rhetoric right across the country in places up and down New Zealand. Instead, he can show some leadership and do that. What we're going to do is to spend a huge amount of money and have jamboree right around the country on a bill which is going nowhere.
It's never going to happen, though, is it? Because if Luxon did anything that involved a spine, Seymour would chuck his toys, and as Bomber's been saying for the last year, there'd be a snap election.
And I mean, if that's your worry, then why are you in government?
Yeah.
Because you've got to show leadership is about leading. It's about demonstrating that you're not going to be held to ransom over and over again. Because if it's not this, then what's next? Because you've got to be able to say, hang on a second, we're a political party. Me and the Prime Minister may disagree on lots of things, but I respect the fact that he may have a political philosophy that he abides by. He's got to demonstrate that political philosophy. Otherwise, he's not a leader.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. Chewy, jump in, brother.
Yeah, like I wonder if I'm giving Luxon too much credit here to just say that he's not aware of what this is going to stir up. I think you're right. This is an opportunity for him to show some leadership that he so far hasn't, and show that he actually is the Prime Minister rather than just some guy that's trying to manage some rebellious middle managers. But I honestly don't think he sees it.
Well, I can tell you from painful personal experience, Chewy, that the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet and the Treasury will be keeping him exquisitely well informed of how expensive this is, and how likely this is to be divisive, how likely this is to be controversial, how likely this is to stir up further challenges down the line. how this is not buying any goodwill in any treaty settlement anywhere in the future, and how this is likely to bring forward future contemporary Treaty of Waitangi claims, which will then cost the Crown more money. If nothing else, let's put the money to one side for a second. It will cost the Crown manner. It will cost the Crown, integrity, respect, because we're attempting to change the rules of the game halfway through. There is nothing to be gained from this process short of 2 or 3% for Mr. Seymour in the polls, which is the difference between him being re-elected and not.
And we've seen Luxon's tactics here is that whatever these guys, whether it's Seymour or Peters stirring up this, that he'll just go, that's a matter for my coalition partner. That's part of the coalition agreement. There's no ownership of the fact that he's the Prime Minister, that he's the captain, for better or worse. And he's got 2 lieutenants running around kicking over buckets and doing all sorts of nonsense that he needs to pull into line. I think this mammoth amount of money that they're spending, I've hammered this line a little bit in the last couple of months. This is economic vandalism. They can't say out one side of their mouth, we're about stopping wasteful government spending, when they then go out and do some more wasteful government spending on a dead duck bill that by everyone's admission is not going to go anywhere. But we have to hold this dying thing for 6 months and let it bleed poison out into our national discourse.
I mean, if working in government teaches you anything, it teaches you that life is a series of choices. And that there are a whole bunch of choices that are put in front of you by a civil service that's excellent at working out. There you've got A, B, C, or D. Pick one and we'll work out what you want to do with it. We're making a choice to spend $4.1 million minimum, very likely a much larger figure in reality. That's 40 nurses. That's what Wairapa Hospital is short of right now. That's 1.383 million free school meals. That feeds 7,000 kids for a year. Right? For a piece of paper that's going nowhere. Right? We are cutting disability services around the country. Right? There are people who can't get into hospital. There are people dying in A&E because we don't have enough money in the health service. Right? We are wasting money. It is a choice. And as a consequence, we should think really hard about those people who choose to waste that money on something else. And when we're choosing to waste it on a bill that is dead, simply to demonstrate that your political virility, then get over it. Be an adult.
You said something earlier and I wrote it down, Craig, because I think we keep talking about having these little quotes and ideas around how National should run their 2026 campaign. But you said you've made a terrible blunder and you should walk this back. National 2026. I think you could look at that honestly, think about it. Ferries, there's so many things. You've made a terrible blunder and you should walk this back. And that seems to be a bit of a theme as to what we're seeing with this national government at the moment.
There's a phrase in golf, isn't there? If you make a mistake, you just shout mulligan and you get another go. Right? Is that the campaign slogan? 2026 mulligan. We get another go. We won't make the same mistakes this time. Right. But there are there are ferries. There's $500 million to not own 2 ferries. Yeah. We're spending money to not build schools. We've stopped school rebuild programs. We're spending money on boot camps that cost $500,000 per child. Right? There's a whole bag of things. There's a charter schools program, which is another ACT policy, which is $153 million to part privatize an education system, and for which there is no evidence that it will actually lead to any better outcomes for kids.
Yeah,
it's maddening.
I saw a headline about that just as I was getting ready about charter schools. And what seems to be happening every day, and actually along with this conversation, I don't, and forgive me, because of these technical issues, I'm not quite as set up as I would be, but also Māori health experts are coming out talking about this as well. And some of the articles are actually your quotes from the same quotes as their quotes as well. And so there's another open letter. Māori health experts, it's just every single day we've got experts coming out saying, hey guys, this is not gonna go well. But there's something funny, Craig. I can't remember what the story is, true, maybe you can help me, but we looked at a story last week and it was from the previous national government, and without fail in that story it was saying they're ignoring official advice. I'm like, shit, this is just a national thing. This is not a Luxon national thing. This is a national thing. We ignore official advice. National 2026.
Yeah. And so I was at a meeting this morning where I was asked to work out how much funding, taking away the charitable funding from the ambulance service and having a fully private, publicly funded ambulance service would cost in the country. The charitable contributions are around $80 million a year. Yeah. So if you wanted to spend the money, right, to deliver a fully publicly funded ambulance service, it would be about $80 million a year. The excise costs for reducing the excise costs for heated tobacco products is $216 million.
Far out.
Right,
Craig, can I please ask one thing, Craig? Can you please stop fucking putting things into context, because it makes them sound really depressing.
Jesus.
I mean, it's the job of an economist. I can professionally depress people from 250 paces. It's called the dismal science for a reason. But I mean, there's a real challenge here, right? We're going to spend $4 million on a dog and pony show for an MP to not progress anywhere. I mean, fine, you do that. Let's spend the money. Let's have people do this work. But to then say this is the most valuable use of those public servants' time, to say that's the most valuable use of Parliament's time, that a select committee, 12 MPs going around the country to talk about this issue and to talk about new treaty principles, that's a really valuable and sensible thing to do right now. That seems a stretch too far. That stretches credibility even for Mr. Seymour. Yeah.
All right. Hey, Craig, before you go, because we're about to go and talk about Shane Reti outlines the government's ambitious new health targets next, and I'm sure you've had a look over that. It seems that from One News, one of the concerns from some people were that they'll fudge the numbers. Now, obviously, we can't say that's going to happen, but it's a concern from some. Just before we get into that, before we say goodbye to you, got any thoughts around that announcement today?
There's real challenges with the targets that have been put forward. Lots of health targets. It doesn't matter actually which political side of the spectrum you come from. They get gamed, and it's just it's actually a function of how honest do you want to be. I come from a country where you had to be able to see a GP inside 48 hours. That was the UK's GP promise. All it meant was you couldn't book a GP more than 48 hours in advance. So it was physically impossible. It was physically impossible to fail the test. Right? So it's actually about the honesty and the integrity behind it. So you set the targets, but actually you look at what are the real outcomes that you're getting, not whether or not the targets are being delivered. Are people getting the services that they need? Are big treatments for cancer, for heart disease, child disorders, are they getting better? Are we actually spending more at the bottom of the cliff in terms of health rather than at the top of the cliff in terms of primary healthcare? If we're doing all those things right, actually the targets are fairly meaningless. What we really need is to actually better understand how to deliver health services and to properly fund them in New Zealand, not concentrate on 5 arbitrary targets, which actually don't tell you a great deal to begin with and will get gamed along the way.
Chewy, there's a couple of super chats here. Questions too, Craig. You okay to take a couple of these questions, Craig?
Of course.
Okay. So James's one first says, can Craig estimate the cost of 6 months of select committee costs in terms of the cost of the pay of the committee members, not just the 4 staff?
I can do, but to be fair to the integrity of the calculations, those MPs are already would be delivering a select committee process. So for the majority of those MPs, that is something that they would be doing regardless in terms of their particular piece of work. And to some extent, they're driven by the minister making that decision to put that bill through. So once they've done that, they're automatically on that chain.
Right.
There are other things that they could be doing, but it wouldn't make a lot of sense to put that in. But I mean, in all seriousness, to run Parliament, just from the staffing, just from the MP costs $64,000 an hour.
Wow.
So that's the cost of everyone from the Prime Minister down to the lowliest backbench MP in terms of their hourly rate. That's before you put overheads on top. So it would be an enormous figure if you were to work out their full 6-month cost.
All right. It's in the ballot also as a question for Craig. Does this same amount of resources that go into a government bill go into a member's bill that goes into the biscuit tin?
I would love that is the case. It is not the case. If a member's bill goes into the ballot, there may be a tiny amount of time. Usually what happens is the office of the clerk and the clerks of the House will offer some support for what we call legislative drafting. So a couple of hours here and there. They will often consult lawyers themselves or people who have experience in writing legislation. But absolutely nowhere near, not even in the same postcode as the amount of money and time that goes into the drafting of a government bill. And the reason for that is fairly obvious. Government bills are designed to pass, and so they have to work. They have to make sense. They have to be clean. Private members' bills can be whatever the private member wants, and then they will get scrubbed on the way through to turn into something that actually could be delivered.
Hey, Craig, it's been awesome to chat. Should we got anything else before we wrap up?
I do have one. It's a whole ass story, but I'm just going to chuck it in really quickly since we're talking about Seymour just taking a bunch of public money and setting it on fire. I saw this today. His Ministry of Regulation is spending almost $500,000 on contractors, and costs more than
that's a misprint.
Department.
It's a misprint because they're not going to use contractors because that's what Labor did and Labor bad. So it must be a misprint.
That's a good point.
His
department was set up 6 months ago, replacing the Productivity Commission. It spent that money on contractors. It's more expensive than the Productivity Commission that it replaced.
Yes,
that he described as a waste of taxpayers' money. Like, at what point do you just scream into a pillow? Is it now? Is it now?
The trade union movement has a phrase: anger, hope, action. So you can scream into the pillow and be angry about it, but actually you've got to use it to try and deliver change, to try and actually get something good to come out of this, right? And for us, this is all of these things are just grist to the mill. Every time they stand up and say you've got to save money, well, what about this on the bill? Why are you not saving money over here? Why is this now an issue? When you're looking at saying, well, we can't spend money over here because there's just not the cash. Well, there's clearly cash for nearly $500,000 of contractors just for one department, which you've just made up, which actually hasn't done anything yet.
Yeah.
And not just the contractors, the people that work for that department, a lot of them are on wages $150,000 a year. Like, it seems enormously expensive.
And from memory, the size of the department is approximately 4 times the size of the Productivity Commission, which it replaced. So there's, again, this is about, speaking out of both sides of the mouth at the same time. It's about making sure that actually we remind everyone, because, I come onto this program occasionally and I keep quoting a number at you, which is the number of days until the next election, which is about 740 something now. Every day between now and then, we've got to be reminding people that this is not an honest deal. This is not an honest conversation. And we have to remind people of that, because when it gets closer to that important date, we give people the option to actually choose something different, something which we might believe to be better.
Yeah. Hey, Craig, it's been amazing. I'm quite liking this not camera being on, Chewy. The number of times I rolled my eyes in this conversation, if anyone else saw it, they might think me rude, but not so much when you've got a glitch in the matrix. Craig, it's always awesome, man. I mean, we'd have you on, I was gonna say every single day. That wouldn't be fair, but as much as you want, because you bring context to this, and I think context is important. When people want to hide big numbers, they use percentages. When people want to hide little numbers, they say the numbers. And it's good to always kind of work out what's important to pay attention to and what's not. And you're a gem to help us do that. So thank you.
Happy to come on anytime, Pat, Chewy. Lovely to be here as always.
Yep. Thanks, dude. All the best.
Thanks, Craig.